And we're really pleased to be hosting this conversation. How do we unlock local growth through science, research and innovation? We have some hot competition with the Chancellor, who's just finishing speaking now, and I'm talking protesters and the rain and lots happening over in the main conference centre. So just to let you know that Torsten will be joining us. We're told he's running from the ACC as we speak, so he might be a bit damp as well by the time he gets here. We've also, I'm sad to say, had apologies from Chi as well. So apologies that she couldn't attend, diary clash, but sends best wishes to everyone. So we're really happy to be partnering with Wellcome Trust on this, and Wellcome Trust are a brilliant partner. We don't have Wellcome on the panel, so I'm just going to say a couple of words on their behalf. Wellcome is dedicated to leveraging science to tackle the world's most urgent health challenges and to foster economic prosperity, which of course we know is the centre of the government's mission-driven government approach. Wellcome has committed 16 billion over the next 10 years to support research finding solutions to 3 major health challenges: mental health, infectious disease and climate and health. And with 80% of its funding focused in the UK, Wellcome is keen to actively collaborate with government, with partners across the system to ensure that the UK's world's leading research and development sector is empowered to deliver the breakthroughs that will transform the future of human health and help drive economic growth. And one of the really interesting things about that is how much that works across this government's mission-based approach to government. We've just come from another panel where we've been talking about how the 5 missions are working in practice across the government. And if you think about the prevention agenda within the health mission, if you think about achieving net zero, there are so many synergies with what we're talking about today. But of course, the new government's main mission, the one they've put at the front of everything, is to grow the economy. And it won't do that without new developments in science, research and innovation. And today we're particularly interested in how we can drive that at a local level, bottom up. And that's another thing that's true of the mission-driven approach, is that it's not all about command and control from the centre, but how do you create the environment that can work towards those shared outcomes? So the question we're going to try and answer in the next hour is, how can we unlock local growth through science, research and innovation? And I'm very pleased to introduce the panel we have here at the moment and soon to join us as well. So on my far right, I have John Foster, the Chief Policy and Campaigns Officer at the CBI. On my left, I have Dr. Alicia Grated, Executive Director for the Campaign for Science and Engineering. And on my right, I have Nigel Hugill, who is CEO of Urban&Civic and Chair of the Centre for Cities. And his big claim to fame, or the one I'm really impressed by, is that he instigated the whole Stratford City project that led to the Olympics coming to London. So quite impressive. So our question is, how can we unlock local growth through science, research and innovation? How can we catalyse innovation? Where will the investment come from? What can the government do to support it? What can other partners do? And how can we achieve it? So we've got some opening remarks from each of our speakers. I'm going to field a bit of a conversation, and then we're really keen to bring in questions from the floor afterwards. So I'm going to start with Alicia.
You know, when someone goes, I'm going to start with, and then there's a gap, and you're like, oh. First of all, a big thank you both to Demos and Wellcome Trust for hosting this. I think this has been the most diverse audience of any event I've ever been to. So just over coffee, I've spoken to the group of taxi drivers there who were talking about how they make taxi drivers smile in Liverpool. And also somebody who set up a business in Fusion in Japan. So we've got like a really wide audience here, which is really exciting. So I hope some of our comments resonate with you today. So when Polly introduced me now, she introduced me as heading up something called CASE, the Campaign for Science and Engineering. I'm not going to give you a big introduction to that. But what I will say is our organisation represents the the whole R&D base, really. We've got about 110 members that covers universities, businesses, charities, a whole range of different organisations, innovation organisations. And the reason I'm saying that is we've been working with them. Well, we always work with them and the wider community, but we've been talking to them obviously about our new government and how we can work with the new government and influence and drive decisions relating to innovation and local innovation. So I'm just going to make some really brief comments of things that came to mind. The first thing is about money. So Polly said money. Everyone loves talking about money because we need that to do things. And I think all of us will feel, I hope everyone feels, that generally then there's positive noises coming from the Labour government. We've generally had quite a positive rhetoric around R&D, around innovation, and some specific examples like the long-term investments and long-term R&D investments that they're planning. But what I did want to say is the whole system is tight. We're in a really tight fiscal environment at the moment. And R&D in the past sometimes has almost had an attitude of we deserve money because R&D innovation is important and we all know it's important. And we're in a situation now where we cannot be complacent. We absolutely need to be coming up with messages, stories. We heard about stories in the last panel, and a narrative that's really compelling and that genuinely impacts on the society around us. And again, I'm reiterating, we've got taxi drivers here today. So how is R&D, how is innovation helping those guys, for example? So relating to that and local growth specifically, we also need to be thinking much more widely. As R&D and innovation, we quite often sit in our ivory towers and we're all talking to each other. And how are we thinking about other partners in the system? And when we look at lots of the briefings, for example, we look at business, we look at government, but we need to be thinking about that whole environment. And universities, I have to talk about charities, but really, really importantly, the public, the society around us, the people that are the consumer, the voter, the person that's paying the taxes. What is their view? How do we really actively engage them in what we're doing in R&D and also in innovation? And the Wellcome Trust, thank you to the Wellcome Trust, has supported some really exciting work we're doing, which is about talking to the public, asking the public what their views are on R&D, what their views are on research and the future of research. And I can talk about that more, but it's absolutely critical that we're building that dialogue with the public. And then the last point, really a question to you maybe, is we had a discussion, we had Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State, come to an event recently. We had a panel discussion there, and one of the questions was about local innovation, and it was around competition and collaboration. So at the moment, when you think about when we're bidding for money or when we're talking about the different activities we're doing locally, very often we're competing. So we're trying to get money away from someone else. How can we, the UK is too small for us to be doing that. So how can we collaborate more effectively? How can we share best practice? How can we know our strengths and work in a way that's complementing other regions across the UK so that we're benefiting the whole country? And I think that's a slightly different way of working, and it's really a question and a challenge for us all to think about today as we go through the discussion. So just to summarise, I think we've got an amazing opportunity, but we definitely cannot be complacent as R&D or innovation sector.
Alicia, thank you so much. That's fascinating. That point about collaboration, let's come back to that definitely. And also about citizens' role in R&D. I'd love to hear more about what that would actually look like. So I'm going to bank those questions. But first, I'm going to come back over to John. John.
Oh, thank you, Polly. And look, just a big thank you to Polly and Demos and the Wellcome Trust for what I hope will be a really interesting event. And also thank you for all of you for choosing to come and hear from us rather than the Chancellor. That means a lot. So look, Torsten's going to run in and he's going to tell us probably what the Chancellor spoke about. But what business would like to hear from the Chancellor, and I suspect she's doing this right now, is reasserting the primacy of the government's growth mission. Polly mentioned it's the first thing that they talk about. Delivering the highest level of sustainable growth across the G7. What we need to see is the Labour Party in opposition had an election strategy that was described as the Ming-Bar strategy. We need to do the same now for growth. So what we are seeing within some of our surveys is a bit of a softening in confidence. Now, that's actually to be expected as we work our way through the economic cycle. The key things to remember are that we've got interest rates that are starting to come down, we've got inflation that is low, so actually we've got some really good fundamental enablers of growth. But what we do need to think about, and if we're in the conference hall, you could play conference speech bingo, are the two biggies, which are investment and productivity. And those are two things that are fundamentally linked. We all know about the UK's productivity challenge, particularly since the financial crash. But to sum it up with an example, it takes a company in Germany 4 days to produce what a company in the UK does in 5. Now, one of the drivers of that is both historic and also current low levels of business investment. We have both a flow, the amount businesses invest every year, and a stock issue, the cumulative impact of low levels investment year on year. Those are the two biggest drivers for how we can deliver that fundamental primary mission around sustainable growth. Now, to deliver that, science, innovation, R&D is about as big a silver bullet as you can imagine. You can't deliver a high growth economy across different areas of the UK without high levels of research and development. And look, what that does require is investment, opportunities to invest, but also the innovation to deliver so. And just to kind of come back full circle to where I started, just before the election, we went out to our regional councils, about 400 businesses, and we did a sort of sentiment check-in. Like, what do you feel about different aspects of the economy? About the regulatory system, the tax system? Actually, perceptions about the UK's innovation system from UK businesses are really high. They see it as a strength of the UK, both domestically, but also when it comes to pitching for global investment. But the truth of the matter, and one of the things that we heard from some of those member anecdotes, is we are leaving growth opportunities on the table. So to deliver that primary mission, we need to think about 3 things. We need to make sure that we've got really firm foundations for a research and development and innovation economy. We need to tackle what is a really challenging productivity problem, particularly with smaller sized businesses that can be driven through innovation. And then finally, we need to really focus on how can we scale up our innovative capacity to deliver both economic but also societal benefits. Those are the 3 things that can really get that primary mission motivated.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Nigel, we talked a little bit about narrative. You've got lots of stories to tell about how to actually do this. So tell us from a local level where you've done this and how.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and also from both a local level and a Wellcome level, because Urban&Civic is owned by the Wellcome Trust in the endowment. And so the profits that we make go back into the scientific research that Wellcome fund. And just starting with that confident point, there are plenty of reasons for being pessimistic, but one of the extraordinary things about Wellcome is that not only do they have this massive research budget, but it's a bit like a big pharmaceutical company, if you like. But in circumstances where there are groundbreaking new findings, a pharmaceutical company would then seek to monetize that through a new cancer drug or whatever else. And in Wellcome's case, one of the specialisms is in genomics. And Wellcome, when they find groundbreaking new studies, they then just give the benefits of that to the world. It's the most extraordinary thing to do. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment is expanding for Wellcome their genome campus. And their genome campus is 9 miles away from Cambridge. And so picking up Polly's point, one of the things we might just talk a bit about is not only the encouragement of growth on the one hand, but in the case of Cambridge, it's probably the case that the growth has actually got ahead of the government's plans. The government is now trying to come back into that. And that so there's a certain amount of catching up that needs to be done, not so much from a planning point of view, but certainly from an infrastructure perspective, without which you then lose the really very considerable momentum that exists. And so the value add in a triangle south and east of Cambridgeshire, which goes through, starts with the biomedical campus and goes down to the Wellcome Genome campus and across to Grant Park. The value add for that's about £120,000 per employee. I mean, it's the highest of anywhere outside of London. And so how do we do more Cambridges, of course, is one question. But also, how do we make sure that continues through the partnership working is the biggest preoccupation for me. Because at the moment, what we are very much representing to government, and of course, it's, if you like, it was both the previous and now the current administration who are looking to put, it's not just more housing in Cambridgeshire, which has been tended to be the priority, but it's also the underpinning of why has the economy been as strong as it has. And a lot of that, in the case of Cambridge, is essentially research-driven, your point, coming out of the university. And of course, it's an exceptional university, and Cambridge is exceptional. But notwithstanding that, there are lessons that we can take elsewhere, but equally well, it's also important that we invest it through the local infrastructure in maintaining that competitiveness. Otherwise, we'll absolutely lose the momentum that exists at the moment.
Fascinating. So there were kind of several messages in there I wanted to pick up on. So the investment point, productivity, and this point around collaboration and how you shift how partnerships work together at local level. So taking first at a kind of national level, I'm going to come to you first on this, Nigel. What can the national government be doing to drive that growth at a local level through investment, productivity, and encouraging that kind of collaboration?
Yeah, it's tough because everybody's got a pet scheme. Some are just bigger than others. So in the case of Cambridge, it's a railway that links Oxford and Cambridge is seen as the first priority. Some of us, including me, might argue that wasn't the biggest priority, but it's in terms of trying to arbitrate on those. The refrain that I always use is, you want the country and the localities to be as connected as possible. We're a small island, and research is massively clustered. So in terms of encouraging good ideas, which is the strength of a research economy, you have to make the collaborations as easy as possible. So at Hingston, we're all about facilitating those serendipitous conversations. And that works across the country. So in all instances, we can argue about High Speed 2 and everything else, but they're fundamentally conviction cases about improving connectivity, because for me, that's the core element of a UK competitiveness.
So something like the Hingston development, where does that start? What's the kind of impetus?
Well, it started because Wellcome established through the Sanger Institute 30 years ago a research campus, and that then gave rise to a specialization in genomics. So it became a world-leading center in genomics, and that in turn attracted the European Statistical Institute for Genomics, which is the only one that stayed after Brexit because they were so closely attached to Sanger. It's a really good, so EMBL and Sanger are kind of joined at the hip. And that in turn, so I mean, for example, in relation to during COVID, 50% of the tracking in the world was done in the UK, and that was basically done by Wellcome at Hingston. And so that knowledge base then builds and creates that additional. It's a bit like throwing a pebble in a pond. You then have the ripples of that growth, and so that's why it is as strong as it is. But equally well, got to make sure the pond has got secure banks. Otherwise, people start falling in, and you lose that sense of direction.
John, picking up on that and those partnerships that are necessary to make this happen. What does successful partnership between government and industry look like when it comes to R&D and building the right infrastructure for innovation?
So I'm just going to steal a little bit about what Nigel said.
Yeah.
Really fascinating to sit next to Nigel and hear him talk about the practicalities. But he started by saying you need the national connected to the local. And so what you need is a partnership of ambition, a partnership of direction, and then finally the partnership of delivery. And that's the kind of element that Nigel was talking about. Now, if we think about this current government, it is so refreshing to hear Peter Carl and Patrick Ballance, a brilliant ministerial appointment, by the way, just to say, putting experts in charge of key roles that they know. More of that, please. But both of them talk really passionately about the role that science, innovation, R&D has part of the growth story. And you can see that in the amount of people that are moving over to work at DCIT that is trying to build itself up as a growth department. That is excellent. The bit that's probably lacking is just that real clarity around the North Star, the ambition, the partnership of ambition. What are we going after? What are we aiming towards? And look, for our money, as part of how do we deliver that primary mission, and in the CBI's budget submission, we've sort of put forward a suggestion that the UK should look to have the highest levels of R&D intensity spend by 2030. So something to go after, because when you give business, private enterprise, something to go after, targets, and government is able to roll in behind, that really helps. So that's that partnership of ambition. You then want to think about the partnership of direction, and that's probably where the industrial strategy comes in. Industrial strategy is the biggest policy game in town, and everyone is desperately trying to crowd in like their sector, their place, their bit. But you will not have an effective industrial strategy if it doesn't have science and R&D running through it like an absolute stick of rock. And then when it comes to the partnership of delivery, the example that Nigel spoke about, that there's been a tendency in government to try and not necessarily pick winners, but to almost fly the plane themselves. That's not the role of government. The role of government is to do really good air traffic control, to make sure that the different parts don't bounce off each other and actually they're coordinated. That's where the cluster approach, looking at where are there geographical centres of excellence that bring together universities, businesses, catapult centres, for example, and then what can government do to facilitate those clusters growing and delivering real investment. So it's the partnership needs to run through right from the top, the ambition to the direction, and then finally right into the delivery.
I've already this conference spent quite a lot of time in rooms with party people talking about missions.
Yes.
So I've kind of slightly got a mission obsession on at the moment. But thinking about everything you've just said, how helpful do you think business will find the mission approach to growth in this?
So look, I think mission approach, when we talk to our members about this, they really like it as an idea. They think it's super. We had Mariana come and talk to our members. What a brilliant sort of advocate for what mission-based policy looks like. The thing the government needs to, I think, really sort of lean into and explain is how are the structures going to operate differently to just normal cabinet committees? How are they going to deliver the sort of KPIs? Are the missions really cross-cutting? Or actually, are they basically just departmental missions? I'll give you an example. Who does West Streeting answer to? Does he answer to himself? Is he responsible for delivering the mission? Is he the person who's accountable for it? That's the type of thing that a business will ask. Businesses are experts in doing cross-matrix policy projects or planning and delivery. That's what this is. So I think the missing piece, the bit for how you get missions to really work, is to allow business to support the government to do the infrastructure delivery to make them set up to succeed. And I think what we're just seeing at the moment is they're finding their way. That's absolutely fine. It's 11 weeks. You sort of forget how much this government has done. 11 weeks. But I think there's a real opportunity if they can get this right. And I think there's a genuine open offer from business to come and work with the government to make the mission-based approach a success.
Thank you very much for that. I am getting messages saying that there's kind of a bit of security issues around the around the ACC and the secure zone after Rachel Reeves' speech, but I think Torsten might not be making it, and I'm really, really sorry for that disappointment. He sends huge apologies. Yeah, move in, come on. So huge apologies for that. Alicia, picking up on that point around missions, do you feel like the science and engineering community is getting their head around this approach to growth and what it means for local growth?
Can I first build on
Of
those
course.
comments?
Yeah.
It was just really interesting what Nigel said when he said, how can we have more Cambridges? So it was quite an interesting comment, because that balance between national strategy, so we obviously need an overview of what's happening in the UK, don't we? And we want it to look sensible as a country and look collaborative and look like we want to hit above, we want to be amazing as a country. I think the challenge is maybe we don't have more Cambridges, because when you look around the country, and I was just at we had these business dinners recently, and the needs, you'll know this, the needs of somewhere like Aberdeen, right, where they're going through the energy transition, the needs for skills, they've got a whole load of educated people out there where the whole industry is completely changing. And then if you go to other parts of the country where they don't have necessarily that much education going on, they don't have good infrastructure, the needs are massively different. So I think the opportunity and the challenge is almost like the Cambridge example, and we've got loads of great sort of shining examples, but what do we do with the other bits of the country where we have some brilliant opportunities, but the models that we have really often don't fit? And it's much more difficult. I worked for years in funding, right? It's much easier to go, this is our funding mechanism, right? You all bid into this because this is the way it works. But the real challenge is, how do we create those opportunities across the country, those opportunities that might be varied for each part of the country, so that we don't necessarily have another Cambridge, we have another Bristol or another Aberdeen or another Liverpool, and I think that's super hard. So it builds on your point. The other thing about innovation is we obviously have all the constructs we know about, like we spend money on, we have UKRI and we have the catapult, we have all the systems in place that we think about that are associated with innovation, right? But when we actually think why people, we are humans, right? And why do we go to do a job? Really often it's about there's a good school, or there's good roads, or there's great taxi drivers that smile at us. There's like a system in place. So the cross-government thing, the thing you were saying about West Street and how people are communicating across government, that's another really important element. So how do we bring the different parts of government to come together? Because it's not just the normal strand, it's not just this direct thing of we get business to invest or we get a great university. It's, are there good roads? Is there a good school? Are there theatres? And that's really complex. But those are the sort of things that come up when we speak to small businesses. Those are the sort of questions they're asking. Can my child go to a school? So it sounds indirect, but it's really important. So that they're much harder, but working together and recognising difference is much harder. And then,
but by the way, the mission approach is designed to bring across silos and bring different parts of government working together. It should be better at achieving
so
that.
I think the opportunity is absolutely massive, and if we can get it right, it's brilliant for the UK. The other thing I wanted to just bring into is building on the work that we're doing with the Wellcome Trust about public attitude. So generally, if we've polled over 30,000 people, and we've also, with the support from Wellcome, and we've also done something called a deliberative dialogue, which is when you work with a group of people over time and inform them, and then you look at changing attitudes. And that has been, all that information has been really, really interesting. And what we found out is generally the public broadly supports R&D. They like the idea of innovation. So they all think it's good, right? But it's a little bit over there. Yeah. So really what we want is jobs in the NHS and really direct things. The R&D and innovation is seen a little bit on the horizon. But when we give them examples of something, and this is quite obvious, but when we give examples of how things touch our lives and affect our community and our daily lives, the attitude changes quite significantly. So it's really important for us as a community, as an R&D community, as people working in R&D and innovation, to make sure that we're developing those stories that we heard about last time, that we're using the missions to engage society so people can really And I don't mean this in a patronising way when I say understand. I mean, so we're engaging people so that it's clear how it benefits their lives. And the bit that's frightening with the results that we've got is the most sceptical people, if you look at the demographics, it's younger people that are most sceptical. And we thought it would be the other way around, right? So we are not
What are they sceptical of?
R&D.
Just broadly.
Yeah, and if we should be investing in R&D and all the questions we ask them around the value of R&D, it's young, across all you can look at our website, we've got all the stats there, but it's young people that are the most sceptical. I think that's
What's behind that
problem. Well, we need to look at that, but that's a great question. But we have a responsibility as a community. We have a responsibility to care about that, in my view. And the missions is a brilliant example of where we can show these big important questions that are facing society. How is innovation tackling those? How is R&D tackling those? So there, I got a bit passionate there.
It's so interesting that you raised that. There's a whole body of work that we do at Demos, creating deliberative ways of working to bring citizens into public policy issues. And it might be in a big planning area, it might be around a ethical issue around science and development, lots of different areas. But in R&D specifically, what's the argument for bringing citizens into that process? Why do you need that deliberation, that understanding of where citizens are?
Yeah, so the reason that we were originally doing this work is because our role, there's exciting notes coming about Torsten here. So I feel like I want to sneak a look, see what's happening.
Torsten is coming.
Oh no, I've got to move seats now. At least it's
Unless
warm.
I get some other notes.
So I've lost my track of. Oh yeah, the original reason we started this work is because our job is to advocate on behalf of the sector. So we are speaking to policymakers and politicians all the time, and we felt there was a big gap. A joint in collaboration with Welcome, we felt there was a big gap in understanding about the views of the public, and we know lots of people in that space. So our role is to convene. We're only a small team, so our role is to convene. So we have started that work. And there's been massive interest in it, and the grant actually finishes really soon, but we're hoping to continue that work. So the driver for that was actually about influencing government, not influencing, it's advocating on behalf of the sector. But the issues are actually very wide, and I think we owe it to taxpayers, we owe it to society to care about that.
Absolutely.
And it also makes our research better. Sorry, that was almost.
I was going to say, I think the tough thing about, and particularly with young people, is that research and development is a nebulous concept. So in all my 30 plus years with planning applications, it's much easier to show people and have them consult round a model than it is round a concept. And so that R&D is really, really tough in that regard. And it goes to the bigger point, which is, for me, which is how, in relation to your question about the mission, what's the clutch plate? What's going to make that work through? And I think the way things are set up at the moment, unless we're going to have another local government reorganisation, you've got to look at doing that through, in particular, unitary authorities and metro mayors. And that's got to be the way to do that, because you've got to go back to make it relevant. The way you make it relevant to local people is make it concrete, and really the only structure to do that, I think, at the moment is through metro mayors and through unitary authorities. So I hope that's the direction that they will go, because otherwise this government will go, because otherwise you'd be 3 or 4 years in there changing things around.
I'm thinking from the kind of local up perspective, what are the blockers that you've faced in doing this kind of development work?
I've never not achieved a large-scale planning concept in my entire life, but sometimes it takes a very long time. So I don't know if they're necessarily blockers, but they're certainly hurdles, and we have contrived to make things more complicated than they need to be. And that's definitely, going back to the 11 weeks, that's definitely something that Matt Pennycook and colleagues are determined to row some of that back, because we had taken, if you like, the extremes of European legislation and then put some more bells and whistles on top of that. So I think we're rowing some of that back, not abolishing it completely, but because planning is necessarily a process of arbitration. But it is at the moment, or it was too easy to prevent. If you gave me a lawyer, I could stop pretty much anything for 3 or 4 years, just by knowing the way around the system, for next to no money. Now that's clearly not a good way of doing things. So the changes in relation to solar farms, but in particular things like data centers, the infrastructure for industrial growth going forward, the switches around those which have been implemented are really important. And people haven't quite yet appreciated that, because you can't, with AI and everything else, you fundamentally need data centers to drive that. And so previously, actually, it was rather difficult to get planning consent for a data center. It's a pretty daft situation to have. So consequently, they were all concentrated in one place around Slough because they were fine about having them. So I think those changes have already been made and will have much bigger consequences than people have yet appreciated.
The politics around planning is going to get really, really interesting over the next Parliament, as you've got this huge push from the centre to fast track planning applications. And you've also got MPs around the country with more fragile mandates than they expected, who will be under pressure potentially to oppose that planning. Do you see kind of ways through that? And maybe I'll come to you on that as well, John.
Can I just go first on that?
Of course.
People assume that it's local MPs. Actually, it's not really that. It's local planning authorities. So it's the level below that, and that goes back to my point about clutch plates. So at the moment, those planning are done through the local authorities. Now, those are local authorities that the first elections for those are next May. They're not 5 years away. So it's a very different dynamic than the relaxed guys. We've got a 180 majority, including Torsten. And we've got 5 years to go.
Yeah. Torsten, welcome.
Hello, sorry, it's wet, people. It's really frigging wet.
It's very wet and you got trapped.
I feel like
Well, confidence is in lots of ways defined by being trapped, isn't it? But we are all in it together, people.
Absolutely.
I'm feeling this is positive so far.
It is, yes.
John, we're just going to come in on what we will come to Torsten about, because it will be Torsten's problem. But,
And I'm leaving.
Look, I won't talk for too long, not least because the gentleman that left when you announced Torsten wasn't going to come is the equivalent of leaving a football stadium only to hear the cheer when your team scores the last goal. But look, what I would say is I think it's quite interesting, this kind of group of, they describe YIMBYs, so like yes to my backyard. So look, I think this is a group of parliamentarians that recognises that having a growth mission, every government wants to grow the economy. That is just accepted. Making it a mission means you have to make choices, and choices in government are difficult. So that's going to be a realistic obstacle. The thing about the planning system, and we said the government's done a lot already in the first 11 weeks, that direction of travel, like one of the first things Angela Rayner did was say yes to those 2 data centres. Brilliant. The stuff in the NWPF consultation around classifying data centres as part of the National Significant Infrastructure Project, yeah, super, we're into that. I think probably the bit to think about is that if we do, and we hope we do, build more data centres, laboratories, all of these kind of things, they require a lot of energy. And you need to think about the connection to the grid. And that's probably the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle in the NWPF. You can see in Ireland, for example, that has been able to get data centres up quickly, just how much grid capacity it takes. It's something like 20 to 30%. So that, I think, is going to be the challenge. But yes to the YIMBYs, you have our full support.
so Torsten, we're talking about how can we unlock local growth with science, research and innovation.
Yep.
We had just got to the point around planning, where there is obviously huge appetite for planning reforms, and yet there could be pressure on individual MPs. in their backyards to oppose it. So some of the politics around that as well. But you might also update us a bit on what Rachel said, because we were all
No
here.
pressure.
Well, I mean, it's 45 minutes long, people, so
Yes.
do you want all of it? I thought you were going to tell me you'd found the answer, and you were going to tell me the
we were
answer
waiting
to
for you.
the question. Okay, I can riff a bit from what Rachel said into the topic here. I mean, look, why does the Labour Party care about growth? Why does it care about these issues we're discussing? We don't want R&D for its own sake, although occasionally that's interesting for some sad people like some of us. But we care about it because wages in Britain haven't been growing strongly for the last 15 years because we can't afford the public services we would like without taxes rising to record levels. And that is, in the end, ultimately what a Labour government has been elected to sort out, because that is not, my lifestyle, working life, I should say. Started out back in the Treasury in the mid-2000s. If you told me it was possible to have wages basically flatlining for 15 years, I'd have said you were an idiot, but then I'd have been wrong about lots of things over the last 15 years. So that is what we're trying to sort out, and that is what ideally R&D, innovation, our science ecosystem is part of doing. Now, most of that is about, or lots of it is about institutions, and obviously Swansea has got 2 large universities, which are having, in one of those cases, the same challenges that lots of higher education institutions are having right now, but is definitely the kind of first thing you would put on your local economic strategy because of the number of people it employs, leaving aside the innovation that flows from it. But it's not just about institutions, it's obviously about people, and I hope everybody is as excited as I am about having a science minister that hasn't had enough of experts. Yes. There, in fact, is one who knew it was possible to have politicians that knew something. It's very dangerous, and Patrick is doing a great job getting settled in. You can always see the difference that is making in terms of clear steers to UKRI, in terms of being part of that wider mission ecosystem. Obviously not taking individual decisions on funding, but making sure that we are all in this together in that sense. As well, you can also see a change government in terms of thinking it might be a good idea to collaborate with people across borders occasionally in the development of science, which maybe you were in favour of, but the British government hasn't been for some time, and that is nice to see coming through very clearly. On planning, look, ideas, I mean, people often say, oh, planning is just about buildings in a new economy, that doesn't matter for innovation, and it is absolute garbage, partly for the reasons that you've set out, which is a lot of the stuff we need to build to do modern science and innovation is going to require building stuff. But actually, even on kind of the stuff that does feel very ephemeral, it still happens in some buildings, people. And like, if I look at it from a Swansea perspective, which is obviously not changed by most of these planning changes because that's devolved to Cardiff, but we are, if you look at what the new First Minister has said in her first few weeks, she's also talked about speeding up the planning system in Wales, but across the UK, in places like Swansea, you do need more good quality office space, and that is going to require some difficult decisions in terms of city centre planning. So that does matter. I thought I should end, because these are panels normally where everybody more or less agrees, which is the dangerous thing about all conferences. So I was going to just do one thing, which is on when we're making the case for R&D, I think one of the lessons I've taken away from the last 20 years of watching the policy kind of ebb and flow, particularly on some of the tax support for corporate R&D, is that we should probably be a bit clearer about what we actually mean, because I've become more sceptical over time about lots of the measures of R&D and the efficacy of some of the ways we've supported them in the tax system. So those of us that are supporters of this being an innovation economy that knows that our future growth is dependent on this kind of progress need to be a bit tougher on ourselves on what is and isn't R&D, and maybe don't support the stuff that we know is indefensible. I thought I should throw that in because otherwise we'll all be kind of friends.
R&D?
Teaching someone to use a printer is not R&D spend. I'll give you an example. Go and talk to a small business tax advisor right now and ask them for a list of what is not R&D, and they'll tell you in 5 seconds because they are raking it. I didn't say that, that was all off the record. Yeah. The end.
Thank you, Torsten, and thanks for joining. The thing we talked about quite a lot before you came is how this whole agenda fits within the mission, particularly as you get to the local level. Because I think as we're embarking on this kind of mission-driven government, it's being conceived from the centre in the first instance. But what would good look like if R&D was powering local growth, and how would we have got there at a local level? as a result?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I'm not sure it's right to characterise it as driven from the centre. I mean, it's true that, we've just elected a government and in its manifesto it had 5 missions, so those are kind of the things they're going to be getting on with. But in terms of the mechanisms for delivering those missions, they're definitely not just centrally driven. There's lots of focus. You'll have seen Angela Rayner yesterday talking about completing the devolution journey within England. You've already got, as I say, in my neck of the woods, a Welsh government and a UK government that are for the first time actually able to pick up the phone to each other, and that's obviously it made a big difference in terms of not the perfect outcome in terms of what we've seen in Port Talbot in recent weeks, but making sure that we're getting on with things that weren't done for years have been making progress. So I don't think it's right to say it's all top down, but and lots of things that were all right. Raucous crowd. So I don't think that's right. Obviously, locally, I think we should be clear about in the long run. This is now a bit wonky, but what is R&D delivering for us? Okay, well, from an economic perspective, it's aiming to drive up our levels of productivity, which in the long run is one of the things the main thing driving up our wages and our living standards. Okay, that's what we're about achieving. At the local level, most of the literature tells us strong local innovation networks will do 2 things. They will probably help raise employment, so the overall level of employment in an area. So you want it for that reason. So having an active university will definitely raise your employment levels. Particularly amongst those with lower skills in the area. So that's the kind of inclusive story that should come from local innovation strategies. What it doesn't do is drive up lower and middle wages. It creates well-paid jobs for a small number of people, and it can create it definitely raises wages of well-educated people in an area, and it can raise employment level, which really matters, particularly amongst more marginal workers. But it won't drive up middle and lower wages on average, because what matters for that is national level productivity, which it can contribute to, but you won't in of itself deliver that, which is why you need the whole shebang. Not you don't want to put all your eggs in this basket, but it definitely achieves those things, and those things are incredibly desirable.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to open up to questions. We've got about 10 minutes for questions, so let's take this triangle of 3 at the front first. Billy, with the mic, thank you.
Hi there, Lucy Finlay, social enterprise expert. I have noted when I've been talking to various R&D businesses that there's quite a narrow definition of the term business, and some of that is driven by UKRI. And this sort of narrowness of the investment, I think, is part of the challenge. And it goes back to what Alicia was talking about, how we get a greater involvement of local communities and how we get a different driver for inclusive growth and how we can, open that out. So I'd welcome any thoughts that the panel has on how we open up the investment and also the business models.
Brilliant. I'm going to take them in 3, so do pass back to you. Thanks.
Hi, Nick Sturge, very active in innovation ecosystems in various places, mostly west of England. I fear there's a implicit assumption here around R&D as something that will create jobs that then other people can do, but it's richer than that. And actually, for me, unlocking local innovation growth, but at the same time creating social value and economic wealth, is engaging people who we're not engaging yet in the R&D in development. So most R&D happens in SMEs. 99.7% of UK businesses are SMEs. That's where the activity is happening. There's an awful lot of businesses who are desperate for talent. Now, it's partly skills, but a whole load of other barriers. So if we can crack that about local engagement, local talent acquisition, which is very much a devolved thing, because as Alicia said, the different localities have different issues. But it's perhaps being imaginative about how we use apprenticeship levy or other things where there are things that exist to really break down those barriers, engaging disenfranchised communities where there is huge potential for innovating to create global products and services. So I'd like to hear that.
Thank you.
Mark Corbett, London High, representing London universities. Over the past 15 years, I'd probably argue that R&D in our universities has been very good. It's one of the things we can still be proud of. So what is the problem here? Is it what do we need to do more of and what needs to be done differently? Is it things like looking at our spin-outs and startups that we're very good at? And is the issue something around scale-up? Is that one of the big weaknesses that we have in the country? And investment, how we use that investment to capitalise on the great research that we find in this country.
So Lucy's question was on the narrow definition of business, Nick on the wider benefits of innovation, the social and economic wealth it creates, and the last point on what universities can do differently. Torsten, do you want to take your pick of those first?
Why not do a bit of the last one, because then there's a good question. So there's two. My short answer to that is the big problem in Britain is low investment, not low R&D per se. Or at least low R&D is not the thing that makes us stand out. You'll be aware of the dispute about how we measure R&D generally. So the historical view that we're an absolute outlier is dependent on one set of data, which may or may not be what's actually going on. But and as you say, in terms of R&D that's being supported inside universities, it's hard to see that we have a bad set of outcomes. So insofar as we're talking about Britain's stagnation for the last 15 years, it isn't low levels of R&D in our university sector that is driving that. Britain is poorer because it doesn't invest generally, right? Particularly corporate investment, but also public investment, which is too low and too volatile. So if you're going to focus on one thing, which you can't do in government because life's complicated and so is the economy, then low levels of investment generally is the challenge. That's what like big picture if you were doing diagnosis. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have lots of views on a better R&D ecosystem. It doesn't mean it doesn't make a difference to some of those areas, but it's not the core thing that's holding back Britain. That's true.
Yeah, thank you. And Alicia, did your eyes light up at the
No, let's have all of it.
Business
All right,
question?
to say some very short comments on all of them. So I loved all those questions. So Lucy, it's really interesting you asked that question because I said we had Peter Kyle speaking at an event last week and we asked almost exactly the same question. Well, we didn't get around to asking, but we had it on our list. So I think we need to make that case, and there's lots of reasons for that. A big one is around diversity, full stop. So social enterprises tend to be driven. We focus very much on STEM for a start. So if you look at art schools or across the whole R&D spectrum, a lot of social enterprises come from, well, potentially from non-STEM areas and from women. So I think there's a super interesting question about that and how we define business. So I think we need to put that case forward as a community. I think the point that you made, Nick, well, that resonates massively. What I feel, so, in the last, I don't know how many people were in the last session when we talked about missions. So we talk a lot about getting experts around the table. This always makes me totally panic, right? Because I go to all these Royal Society dinners and it's all the same people. I mean, they're all amazing and they're all the experts. And I love Patrick Mallins and I'm so pleased he's in that place, right? But he's at those dinners. Where are the SMEs? Where are the social enterprises? Where are they? Where are they? So, and I can even talk about our members. It's quite hard to get those voices. So again, the experts are important, but we need to hear the other voices, not the same voices that are coming in, because the way we get really true innovation is listening to those, a diverse set of, we know innovation is driven by diversity. So when we make the decisions, let's get a diverse group around the table. Let's make it a bit different, but I know it's hard to do because we run these round tables and it's hard. And then the last one, if I understood it properly about what universities could do, if I'm being brutal, right? So, I mean, I've worked with that, my whole family were academics. I mean, I've lived academia is like my life for a long time, but I do think we live in a bit of an ivory tower. So the intangible benefits of university R&D, which we've just published something around, they're massive. So when you talk about those deprived communities, there's so much universities can do that I think are on the intangible benefits. So I think we could look much more outward and creatively on the impact of universities, because we do brilliant things, but I think there's more we could do with the communities around us. So I'd say the thread running through that is diversity.
Fantastic, thank you. Nigel?
Yeah, just quickly on that last point. I mean, in a way, universities aren't the problem, as Torsten says. I was on the board of the London School of Economics for 12 years, and there was a fantastic set of spin-outs from there, from Oxford, from Cambridge. And a lot of the computer-generated games and gaming and all the rest of it around Bristol, you would know. The difference is It's that cluster of, if you like, elite universities, not so much once you get to a level below that. And the bigger point is not really the university in any event. We're pretty good at that. It's that broader innovation introduction that you're talking about. So I wouldn't worry so much in relation to the universities. If I look at Cambridge, which is to sort of finish off where we started, the problem there is actually almost keeping up, not encouraging further.
And John, did you want to pick up on the definition of business? Or
No, not really. That has been said. I might just say a few words to Nick's question. So look, Torsten is absolutely right that the value of sort of high innovation clusters comes from the fact that they deliver high, well-paid jobs. What they don't do is raise the overall sea level of productivity across the economy. And that's the big juxtaposition we have in our economy. We have these brilliant clusters of economic and technological excellence, but we have a really long tail of low productivity SMEs. We have something like, everyone knows the phrase, SMEs are the backbone of the economy. Yes, but we have 1.4 million SMEs produce about 45% of our GDP. Comparison to their sort of equivalents in the States, they deliver something like 17% lower productivity per hour